All right, let's
Pitter
time
patter,
is.
let's get going.
That's not how that goes.
Hello
Wanna do
and
another-
welcome to. Oh, hello and welcome to JudgeCast. I'm one of your hosts, Bryan Charles, and I'm joined this evening, afternoon, morning drive to work by the one and only Charles Feather
Hello, hello.
and the one and only Marcos Sanchez.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. This episode is part 8 in our ongoing series where we have partnered with Judge Foundry. Marcos?
All right, so this episode and our entire series for L1 Essentials is sponsored by Judge Foundry. Judge Foundry is a membership-based nonprofit organization serving the U.S. and Canada in providing certifications for tabletop gaming officials. They manage everything to do with obtaining and maintaining your certification and provide educational resources just like this one to ensure that every Judge Foundry certified judge has the knowledge and skills to be successful. When it comes to running magic events at your local game store or at larger international conventions, Judge Foundry is a great resource for you to certify your skills. For more information on Judge Foundry, visit judgefoundry.org and click on the orange Become a Judge button to find out how you can earn your level. The link is in the description below. Fight!
Okay. In this episode, we will discuss how combat works, as well as some common keywords and how they interact with combat. This will continue our focus on what a level 1 judge working FNM or scheduled events at a larger event should know. As always, not every corner case is explored in depth, but if you wish to go deeper or explore topics faster than these videos come out, you can delve into our extensive library at JudgeCast.com or search for us on your podcast app of choice. Our podcasts are typically at least an hour, so you get both more detailed discussion, humor, insight, and of course, our raucous chatter.
All right. Last episode, we went over the steps and phases of a turn, and we kind of brushed over combat. So we're just going to have a brief summary right here before we get into the nitty-gritty. Combat is made up of 5 steps. We've got the beginning of combat, the declare attackers, declare blockers, combat damage, and end of combat. Once we leave the main phase and enter the beginning of combat step, the active player can no longer cast sorceries or new creatures or artifacts. Things that trigger at the beginning of combat go on the stack, and opponents get an opportunity to cast instants and activate abilities to stymie attackers before they can be declared, that kind of stuff.
Now, players occasionally will shortcut through this step by just jumping from the main phase and immediately start turning their creatures sideways. But the opponent can always insist on being able to perform actions before we start declaring attackers. Now, the next step is declare attackers, and it begins with a turn-based action of declaring attackers.
Whoa.
Huh, funny how that works. Once we leave the beginning of combat step and move to declare attackers, players do not get priority until after the attackers are declared.
Declaring attackers is a 12-step process.
Woof.
First, choose what creatures they control that will attack. They have to be untapped and have haste or have started the turn on your side. Second, active player announces which battles, planeswalkers, or in a multiplayer game, which defending player is being attacked. And there you go. That's all there is to declaring attackers. Wait, did we say that there are 12 steps and that was only 2? There are 10 more? Oh no! Yep. After we've decided that creatures are attacking what, we look to see if any creatures we control, not just the ones attacking, are affected by any combat restrictions. Combat restrictions often take the form of this creature can attack, or can attack unless condition. If any of the attacks violate a restriction, the declarations of attackers are illegal, and we go back to step 1 and try again.
The next thing we do is we check all our creatures to see if they are affected by any requirements. Requirements are things like must attack each turn if able. All right. In order for an attack to be legal, we have to satisfy the most requirements possible without violating any restrictions.
For example, if our opponent controls Warmonger Hellkite, which makes all creatures attack each combat if able, and if there are no restrictions involved and I have 3 bear cubs, then the only legal attack is attacking with all 3 bear cubs. Attacking with fewer creatures is not a legal attack, so we would have to go back and try again if we tried to do that. However, if we have 2 bear cubs and 1 master of cruelties, then it's a little different. Then I must attack with only the 2 bear cubs, as attacking with the 2 cubs means I am satisfying 2 requirements and 1 restriction.
That's because the Master of Cruelties can only attack alone.
Correct. Just like the cheese. Wait.
No, cheese checks out. If I only had 1 Master of Cruelties and 1 bear cub, then I would get to choose which creature attacks, because with Master of Cruelties restriction, the maximum number of requirements I can satisfy is 1. Restrictions result in some weird situations. If I have a trusty companion enchanted with Bloodshed Fever and a bear cub, then my only legal attack that satisfies all requirements while not violating any restrictions requires me to attack with both the trusty companion and the bear cub.
There's another carve-out. If a creature can't attack unless a player pays a cost, like from Propaganda, they're not required to pay that cost, even if paying the cost would increase the number of requirements being met. Then we have a rule to deal with banding. All right. And if you want to know about banding, then you want to listen to our podcast, because banding is not on the L1 exam or any exam ever.
Aww.
Okay. Yep.
Not after the riots.
Nope. After all this, we tap the chosen creatures. And you would think that we're done now, but oh no, we have to still deal with the consequences of things like you choosing to attack into that Propaganda. All right. So first, I say first, but it's been a bit. If there's any optional cost to attack, like exert, the active player chooses which they're going to pay.
Now after that, we look at all the optional costs that were chosen and the required costs to attack, and we determine the total costs. This could be paying mana, but may also be things like discarding cards or sacrificing creatures. Outside of propaganda effects, this is fairly uncommon, and don't confuse this with effects that would trigger on attack. These are 2 entirely separate things. Once we have determined the total costs, the player has the opportunity to activate mana abilities. Then you pay the costs in any order.
Now those creatures become attacking creatures, and any abilities that trigger on attack trigger and go on the stack. And players finally get priority. We need to say a few words about attack triggers. If triggers have a condition, those conditions have to be true at the moment of attack. It cannot become true later. In the case of Burke, Long Ear of the Law, if a creature does not have a counter on it when it is declared an attacker, the trigger will not happen, even if it would get a counter as a result.
Also, triggers that are worded whenever a creature attacks only triggers when a creature is declared as an attacker through the process that we just talked about. Okay, tokens or creatures that were put onto the battlefield tapped and attacking do not count. These creatures did not attack despite them being attacking. Clear as mud, right?
Super.
So, after attackers are declared and all state-based actions are checked, triggers go on the stack, players get a chance to do things before we move to declare blockers. Okay, once all players are done doing things and all players have passed priorities, we move to the declare blocker step, and the first thing we do is to declare them blockers.
This is very similar to declaring attackers. We choose the creatures that we want to block. Then we choose which attacking creatures we are going to block. We look at any restrictions and requirements to ensure that we're satisfying the most requirements while not violating any restrictions. Now, some restrictions might be created by an evasion ability on an attacking creature with flying, for example. If any costs to block have to be paid, once again, we determine the total cost and the defending player pays them. Then each creature chosen to block becomes a blocking creature.
If a creature loses or gains an evasion ability after blockers are declared, the creature doesn't suddenly become unblocked. Giving a creature flying after it was blocked by a ground creature doesn't cause it to become unblocked. Same thing with using a removal spell on a blocker. Your attacker does not suddenly become unblocked. Now state-based actions are checked, players have a chance to activate abilities and play instants and do stuff before we move to damage. Just as it's possible to put creatures onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, It's possible to put creatures onto the battlefield blocking. Those creatures are blocking, but they never actually blocked. Once players all pass priority, and we are done with abilities and instants, we move to the combat damage step.
The first thing that happens in the combat damage step is the attacking player announces how each attacking creature is going to assign its combat damage. Then the defending player announces how each blocking creature is going to assign its combat damage. Much like declaring attackers and blockers had a lot more steps than initially thought, assigning and dealing damage also has a lot more steps, but most of them are tied to several abilities that modify how damage is assigned. And we're going to cover things like Death Touch, Trample, Protection, First Strike at the end of the episode.
Assigning damage is normally very straightforward. If my 5/5 is blocked by a 3/3, then the 5/5 will assign all of its damage to the 3/3, and the 3/3 will assign all of its damage to the 5/5. In this scenario, there are no choices or decisions. However, in the Declare Blocker step, you could assign multiple creatures to block one attacker. I could have two 3/3s block the 5/5. In this case, the attacker would have to decide how to assign damage. Optimally, the Overlord would assign 3 damage to one creature and 2 to another. But if the attacking player wished to assign all 5 damage to the Saggy Wildling, in this example, they could.
A few other items to remember include an attacker that has been blocked but then has had the blocker removed doesn't assign combat damage. A creature assigned to block who has had their attacker removed through some other means also doesn't assign combat damage. An attacker or blocker with 0 or less power doesn't assign combat damage. Okay, so once we assign all combat damage, that damage is dealt simultaneously. This is a turn-based action. Damage is assigned. Then damage is dealt. State-based actions are checked to remove dead creatures off the battlefield, triggers go on the stack, and now players get priority. The exact text for the state-based action is, if a creature has toughness greater than 0, it has damage marked on it, and the total damage marked on it is greater than equal to its toughness, that creature has been dealt lethal damage and is destroyed. Regeneration can replace this event.
Yep. Now, we're going to talk about a few abilities that change those rules in just a bit, but let's finish out the steps here. After all players pass priority, we go to the end of combat step. This step doesn't do much except for 2 things. Abilities that trigger at the end of combat trigger here, and as this step ends, that is, after both players pass priority to leave, all creatures, battles, and planeswalkers are removed from combat. Okay, this is a rule. This rule here is one that surprises players when opponents do things like untap attacking creatures or ninjutsu an unblocked creature. Okay, those creatures don't stop attacking or blocking until this step ends. And that's combat. Players pass priority, we go into second main.
Pretty straightforward. Now, let's talk about a few mechanics that will make it a little less straightforward and change a few things up. First Strike or Double Strike actually will add a new step to the game. When we start the combat damage step, if any creatures have First Strike or Double Strike, only those creatures get to assign and deal damage during the combat damage step. Then, when the combat damage step is over, the game adds another combat damage step for all the remaining creatures to do their damage. Now here the rules get very precise. The creatures that get to do damage during this second combat damage step are creatures that, quote, had neither First Strike nor Double Strike as the first combat damage step began, as well as the remaining attackers and blockers that currently have Double Strike. What this means in practice is you can't cleverly add or remove First Strike from a creature to prevent it from dealing combat damage, or give it Double Strike.
Neat. Now let's talk about Death Touch. Death Touch is a static ability that makes creatures extra lethal. If a creature is dealt damage by a source with Death Touch, the next time state-based actions are checked, that creature is destroyed. If the creature somehow survives, then the damage is marked on the creature as normal, and the death touchiness stops mattering. Protection is a static ability that is actually 4 abilities, but for this episode we're only worried about one aspect. Combat damage dealt to a creature with protection still gets assigned, but when it comes time to actually deal the damage, it is reduced to 0.
Next up, Trample. It's a fairly complicated mechanic that changes the rules for assigning an attacking creature's combat damage. Trample allows a creature's damage to trample over onto the opponent or planeswalker it's attacking. However, in order for damage to trample over, you must assign lethal damage to all of the blockers. Okay, lethal damage is damage that's greater than or equal to a creature's toughness, while taking into account damage that's already been marked on that creature from earlier and creatures dealing damage to it in the same combat.
All right, that's a lot. This is best illustrated by an example.
Oh, thank goodness.
Love those. So a spell is cast before combat that deals 1 damage to each creature. I then attack with Galta, Primal Hunger. Charles blocks with 3 4/4 tokens.
Get 'em, tokens.
Got him. Now, when Galta assigns its combat damage, it can see the 1 damage marked on each token and assign 3 damage to each of those tokens, for a total of 9. And since Galta is a 12 power creature, the remaining 3 damage can trample right over to Charles's face.
Ouch.
Take that. Now that we've done a good amount of damage to Charles, let's start combining some other things. First Strike and Death Touch. Really, really great combination.
Yeah, very good.
So here we have Glissa the Traitor. If Glissa attacks and is blocked, it can assign 1 damage to up to 3 creatures that are blocking it, killing each of them before they have a chance to deal damage back. Remember, you're assigning based off of how much would be lethal damage, and Glissa is powerful enough with that Death Touch that 1 point of damage is enough to be considered lethal damage.
So let's say you have a 4/4 creature with Trample and Death Touch, and you're blocked by your opponent's creature. That Trample Death Touch creature only needs to assign 1 damage to the opponent's creature to kill it, and then the remaining damage would actually trample over to the opponent. And then, if you have a 4/4 creature with Trample and Double Strike, and it's blocked by 2/2, in the first strike part of combat damage, 2 damage will be dealt to the creature and 2 damage will be dealt to the opponent. And then, when we get to regular combat damage, what will happen is that 4 damage left over for the Double Strike, that goes straight to your opponent's face. So in all, you're doing 6 damage to your opponent if you have a 4/4 Trample Double Striker and your opponent only blocks with a 2/2.
All right. So now let's say we have Galta and have somehow given it Double Strike. Okay. Yep, we're going there. And I attack with my Double Striking Galta, my 12/12 Double Striking Galta, and Marcos, good luck coming up with graphics for this. And so I'm attacking with that, and Marcos blocks with a 10/10 with protection from green. All right, so we have the Galta. It's going to do its first strike damage with Trample. I'm going to have to assign a 10 to the creature with protection from green. Okay, allowing 2 to trample over. And then we go to regular strike, in which case, remember when we said protection reduces all damage to 0? Our double striking Galta is going to look and go like, but I thought I just killed you. And our 10/10 protection from green is going to say, nah, I'm still here. And I have to assign another 10 points of damage to that pro-green creature in order to have my remaining 2 trample over. And then that 10 points of damage again to the protection from green creature gets reduced to 0. Now, let's change protection from green to indestructible. All right? So, instead of having a 10/10 protection from green, I have a 10/10 indestructible that's squaring up against my double striking Galta. In first strike combat damage step, I am going to deal 10 to the indestructible creature. I am going to then trample over 2. Then when it comes time to do regular strike, indestructible doesn't actually reduce the damage to 0. It just makes it so the creature doesn't die. So that creature, that indestructible creature, still has a 10 damage marked on it. So my Galta can then go, oh, it's already got lethal damage. Don't know why it's dead, but I'm a 12/12 trampler. I don't care. And the remaining 12 can just trample over to your face for 14 total damage. Woot.
And next up, we're going to talk about another twist to combat, which is the Regeneration ability. Now, this ability doesn't come up often nowadays, but if you're playing in some of the older formats and see some cards from the way back days, you'll probably encounter some Regeneration. So let's talk about it. What does Regeneration mean? The rules text for Regeneration says that the next time this permanent would be destroyed this turn, instead, you remove all damage marked on it, and its controller taps it. If it's an attacking or blocking creature, remove it from combat. So 3 things. Remove all damage marked on it, and its controller taps it, and you remove it from combat. Now this could be really interesting because, first of all, remember that the damage is still being marked on it. So for things like trample and everything else with double strike, damage is still being marked on it, but it doesn't die when it would be quote unquote destroyed because of having enough damage on it to be lethal. From there, it gets removed from combat. So you don't have to worry about any of those finicky things about like, well, what happens if all the damage gets removed from it? It's just out of it at that point. Ref pulled it out of the field and it's on the bench right now. There are a few effects that talk about permanents not being able to be regenerated, and that just means this wouldn't work. And importantly, you have to have Regeneration in effect before the effect that would destroy the creature. Pretty straightforward.
And more or less, that is all you need to know for how combat works for L1.
Yep, and once again, we'd like to thank Judge Foundry for their support in sponsoring this series for helping you earn your Level 1 certification. Make sure to visit judgefoundry.org and click on the orange Become a Judge button to learn how you can join the Magic judging community in the US and Canada and earn your certification with Judge Foundry.
Join us next time as we continue our series for earning your Level 1 certification. The next one will be casting a spell. And if you want to reach out to us, we have our own Discord server for judges new and old, fans, and anyone who supports the judging community. The invite link to our Discord server is in the description below, as well as our JudgeCast and individual social media links. If you're a fan of our content, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and ring that bell to be notified of when new videos in the series are posted or when a new episode of our full podcast is released. Make sure to check out our channel's playlist for our complete L1 series, as well as a Learn to Judge playlist with episodes from JudgeCast's history focused on helping you become a better judge. And as always, you can find everything relating to JudgeCast at judgecast.com. With that, I'm Charles Featherer, and I keep it fair.
I'm Marcos Sanchez, and I keep it fun.
I'm Bryan Charles, and I keep Marcos busy by suggesting 10/10 protection from green creatures instead of just saying Progenitus.
Yeah, he does.